Clarissa needs a quiet place to recover. You and the baby can move out for a while, right? I froze. My heart stopped for a second. Those words echoed in my head, but I still couldn't believe what I had just heard. My mother-in-law was asking me to leave my own home, so that my sister-in-law could move in instead. My name is Lana, and I'm 30 years old. I'm a doctor at a private clinic, and 3 weeks ago, I gave birth to my first child. My husband, Eric, and I have been married for 3 years, and until now, I thought we had a strong marriage. We live in a 2-story house, partially paid for by his parents, but the lease is in both of our names. During my pregnancy, my mother-in-law, Veronica, barely paid attention to me. She never checked in to see how I was doing, never offered to help, and honestly, I was fine with that. I didn't need her hovering over me. But now she was here, making demands. She wanted me to give up my home for Clarissa, my brother-in-law Henry's wife. Apparently, Clarissa had suffered a personal loss recently, and Veronica believed that she deserved to stay in my house more than I did. "It's just temporary," Veronica said, smiling as if she were doing me a favor. "You and the baby can stay with a friend or a hotel for a while. Don't be selfish." Selfish? I had just given birth. I was still recovering, waking up at all hours of the night to take care of my newborn. And now I was being told to pack up and leave? I turned to Eric, expecting him to shut this down immediately, but he just sat there in silence. And at that moment, I felt my entire world crack. His silence hurt more than his mother's words. I realized then and there, if I didn't stand up for myself, no one else would. But before I could respond, Veronica had already decided for me. The next day, she brought Clarissa over, with suitcases. As if she owned the place, Clarissa wheeled her luggage straight into my living room, plopped onto my couch, and smirked at me. "I really appreciate this, Lana. I'll feel much better staying here." Appreciate? I never agreed to this. But it got worse. Veronica demanded that I give up my master bedroom for Clarissa. "You'll be up all night with the baby anyway. It makes more sense for you to move downstairs so she can get proper rest." Something inside me snapped. I had spent months preparing that room for my baby. I had suffered through back pain, swollen feet, and exhaustion to get everything ready. And now, this woman, this outsider, was supposed to take my place? I turned to Eric, waiting for him to do the right thing. But this time, he didn't even look at me. "Maybe we should just do what Mom says, just for a little while." That was it. That was the moment I knew. My marriage was already over, but I didn't fight. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just smiled. Because I already had a plan. Clarissa had been in my house for exactly 3 days when I realized something horrifying. She wasn't just staying here. She was acting like she owned the place. On the first night, she made herself comfortable in my master bedroom, the room I had decorated and prepared for my recovery after giving birth. Meanwhile, I was forced to move downstairs with my newborn, waking up every 2 hours to feed him while she slept soundly in my bed. On the second day, she rearranged my kitchen, moving my things around as if she had been living here for years. When I tried to grab a cup of coffee that morning, she laughed and said, "Oh, I switched things around. It just makes more sense this way." The audacity. By the third day, I was at my breaking point. I had barely slept. My body was still aching from childbirth. And now I had to deal with an entitled guest who was treating me like a guest in my own home. But the worst part? Eric still did nothing. I begged him to say something, to stand up for me. But every time, he just sighed and said, "She's been through a lot, Lana. Let's not make this harder for her." Harder for her? What about me? I had given birth 3 weeks ago. I was bleeding, exhausted, and barely keeping up with my newborn's demands. Where was my support? Where was my husband, the man who was supposed to protect me? Oh, right. He was too busy being his mother's puppet. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night. I had finally put the baby to sleep. My eyes were heavy, my body weak, and all I wanted was 1 hour of rest. Then, at 1:45 a.m., I heard loud voices coming from upstairs. At first, I thought it was the TV, but as I got up and stepped into the hallway, I realized they were talking about me. I crept closer to the staircase, my heart pounding. "She's being so dramatic," Clarissa scoffed. "I mean, seriously, she's just sitting around all day. How hard is it to take care of a baby?" Then my mother-in-law's voice. "I know. She's acting like she's the only woman who's ever given birth. Honestly, if she can't handle this, maybe Eric should have married someone stronger." My breath caught in my throat. Did I just hear that correctly? Was my own mother-in-law suggesting that I wasn't good enough for her son? I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. All this time, I had been biting my tongue, trying to keep the peace. But they didn't care. They didn't respect me. They saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience. And then, Clarissa said something that made my blood boil. "Well, if she doesn't like it, she can leave." Actually, wouldn't that be better for everyone? I didn't wait to hear more. I turned and walked back to my room, the tiny, uncomfortable guest room they had shoved me into. I stood there for a long time, staring at my sleeping baby, feeling the rage build inside me. This was my home, my family, my life. And yet, these people were treating me like I was disposable. Number no more. I took a deep breath. And then I smiled. Because I had just made up my mind. They wanted me gone? Fine. But they had no idea that by the time I was done, they would be the ones with nowhere to go. I woke up the next morning with a new kind of energy. Not the drained, exhausted version of myself that had been dragging through the past few weeks. This was different. I had spent the night thinking, calculating, planning. They had pushed me to my breaking point, and now? It was my turn. The first step? Making sure they never saw it coming. So, when I walked into the kitchen that morning, I greeted everyone with a smile. "Good morning," I said, pouring myself coffee as if I wasn't secretly plotting their downfall. Clarissa barely looked up from her phone. My mother-in-law, Veronica, just scoffed and shook her head. And Eric? He did what he always did. Nothing. I sat down across from them, sipping my coffee slowly. "So," I began, keeping my voice light, "I've been thinking about what you said last night." Clarissa froze. Veronica raised an eyebrow. "What exactly do you mean?" my mother-in-law asked, her voice suddenly cautious. I smiled. Let them think they still had control. Let them think I was still the weak, helpless woman they had been walking over for weeks. "You're right," I said with a sigh. "Maybe this house is too crowded. Maybe we do need to make a change." Clarissa and Veronica exchanged glances, their smugness barely contained. "I'm so glad you're finally being reasonable," Veronica said, nodding as if I were some disobedient child who had finally learned her lesson. I nodded along, my fingers tightening around my coffee mug. If only they knew. "So," I continued, tilting my head, "I've come up with the perfect solution." I pulled out a folded piece of paper and slid it across the table. Veronica picked it up, unfolded it, and then her face drained of all color. Clarissa leaned over to read it. Within seconds, her jaw dropped. Eric, still half asleep, finally looked up. "What's going on?" His mother turned to him, her hands trembling as she held the paper. This is an official notice from the landlord." Her voice cracked. "It says we have to vacate the house in 48 hours. The room fell silent. And then, I spoke. Calm, confident, and completely in control. "That's right. Since the lease is in my name, I contacted the landlord yesterday. I explained that there were unauthorized tenants living here, people who were making my life miserable. And guess what?" I leaned in, lowering my voice to a whisper. He agreed with me. Veronica's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. Clarissa looked on the verge of screaming. Eric finally grabbed the paper from his mother's hands and scanned it frantically. "Lana, you can't be serious." I laughed. Oh, I was very serious. "Oh, but I am," I said, crossing my arms. You wanted me gone, remember? You told me this house was better off without me. Well, guess what? Now it'll be better off without you. Veronica slammed her hands on the table. You ungrateful little... Careful! I cut her off, my voice icy. Insulting me won't change the fact that you have less than 2 days to find somewhere else to live. Clarissa's voice came out in a shriek. Where are we supposed to go? I shrugged. Not my problem. Eric looked completely lost. Lana, we can fix this. Just, let's talk. I stared at him, feeling absolutely nothing. Talk? I repeated. Like the way you talked to me when your mother and Clarissa took over our home? Like the way you talked to me when I was exhausted, recovering from childbirth, and you did nothing. He swallowed hard, guilt flashing in his eyes. Too late. No, Eric, I said firmly. The time for talking is over. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, and then Veronica did something that almost made me laugh. She turned to Eric and demanded that he fix this. You're her husband. You have rights to this house, too. Stop her. Eric just stood there, staring at the paper in his hands, completely defeated. Clarissa, meanwhile, had gone into full meltdown mode. Her perfect little plan had crumbled before her eyes, and she had no idea what to do next. I stood up, taking one last sip of my coffee before placing the empty mug in the sink. You have 48 hours, I reminded them as I turned to leave the room. Better start packing. And with that, I walked out, leaving them to deal with the consequences of their own arrogance. Comment the number 1 if you want to see how Veronica and Clarissa will pay for this. The next 48 hours were pure chaos. Clarissa was furious, storming around the house, slamming doors, and complaining nonstop about how I had ruined her life. Veronica, on the other hand, spent most of the time calling every relative, every friend, anyone who might take her in. And Eric? He did what he always did. Nothing. At first, I thought they would pack up and leave quietly. But then, on the second night, something unexpected happened. I woke up to the sound of voices outside my door. I grabbed my phone, checking the time, 1:17 a.m. Slowly, I crept to the door, pressing my ear against it. We can't leave, Veronica whispered harshly. She's bluffing. There's no way she'd actually throw us out with nowhere to go. Clarissa sniffled. But what if she does? Then we make sure she has no choice but to let us stay, Veronica hissed. We'll play the victim. If Eric refuses to leave, she can't make him. And if he stays, so do we. I froze. They weren't planning on leaving. They were planning on forcing me to let them stay. I clenched my fists. Oh, you have no idea what I'm capable of, do you, Veronica? Fine. If they wanted to play dirty, so could I. The next morning, I put my plan into action. I walked downstairs to find Eric sitting at the table, looking miserable. We need to talk, I said, placing my hands on my hips. He sighed. Lana, I know you're upset, but this has gone too far. No, Eric, I interrupted. It hasn't gone far enough. He frowned. What do you mean? I pulled out a folder and dropped it in front of him. He hesitated, then opened it. Within seconds, his face drained of color. What is this? He stammered. I leaned in, smiling sweetly. It's a lease termination agreement. He blinked. What? I spoke to the landlord again, I said, my voice calm. I told him I was uncomfortable with unauthorized people living here. Since I'm a primary leaseholder, he agreed to end the lease early, but only if I signed the papers. I tapped the folder. All that's left is your signature. Eric looked at me, completely shocked. Lana, this is our home, he protested. No, Eric, it was our home, I corrected. But the moment you chose them over me, you lost that right. Veronica stormed in. You manipulative little... I held up my hand. Save it. You have until noon to get out. She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could, someone knocked on the door. I smiled, right on time. I walked over and opened it, revealing 2 uniformed police officers. Veronica turned pale. "Good morning, ma'am," one of the officers said. "We received a call about trespassers refusing to leave a private residence." I stepped aside and gestured toward Veronica and Clarissa. "That would be them!" Clarissa let out a horrified gasp. "You called the police on us?" Veronica lost it. "You manipulative—" "Careful," one of the officers warned. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Eric looked at me, betrayed. "Lana, how could you—" I stared at him, expressionless. "Gave you a choice, Eric. You chose them." The officers stepped forward. "Ma'am, you and your guest need to vacate the property immediately. If you refuse, we'll have no choice but to escort you out." Veronica and Clarissa were livid. They screamed, they cursed, they begged. But in the end, they had no choice. The officers escorted them out, kicking and screaming. Clarissa turned back, eyes filled with tears. "You'll regret this, Lana," I smirked. "Doubt it." As the officers led them away, I turned to Eric one last time. "You have 5 minutes to pack your things." His jaw clenched. "You're making a mistake." I laughed. "No, Eric. The mistake was thinking I'd let you walk all over me." The moment Veronica, Clarissa, and Eric were finally gone, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. No more whispers in the hallway. No more passive-aggressive comments. No more feeling like a stranger in my own home. I stood by the window, watching as Veronica and Clarissa were escorted down the driveway by the officers. Their things, what little they had packed, were scattered around them. Eric was still standing on the porch, frozen in disbelief. "You did this to yourself," I said, my voice calm. He turned to me, eyes full of regret. "Lana, please, I messed up. I see that now." I crossed my arms. "You didn't just mess up, Eric. You betrayed me, over and over again, and now you're facing the consequences." Clarissa let out a bitter laugh. "This is insane! We have nowhere to go!" I shrugged. Not my problem. Veronica, her face twisted with rage, lunged toward me. "You think you've won? You think you can just kick us out like garbage? You'll regret this." One of the officers stepped in front of her. "Ma'am, I suggest you calm down before we take this further." I smiled sweetly. "Regret?" Actually, I feel great." Her face turned red. For the first time, she realized she had lost. I was sitting in my living room, rocking my baby in my arms, when my phone buzzed. A text from my former father-in-law. "Thought you might want an update." Eric finally realized his mother and Clarissa were using him. Guess what? He kicked them out. Now, Veronica is crashing with a distant cousin, and Clarissa is couch surfing. Eric's sleeping in his car. Karma is funny, huh? I stared at the message for a moment, then let out a small laugh. It was poetic justice. Eric had thrown away his marriage, his family, for these women, and now? They had discarded him the moment he wasn't useful. I had no sympathy. I moved on. I filed for divorce. I focused on my baby. And honestly, I was happier than ever. Eric tried calling me a few times, but I never answered. Eventually, he gave up. Veronica? She never reached out. She had too much pride. But I knew one thing. She would never forget what happened. And Clarissa? She disappeared. Maybe she found someone else to leech off. Maybe she finally got a job. I didn't care. Because in the end, I won. And I didn't just take back my home. I took back my power. Comment the number 1 if you think karma did its job perfectly. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this.